Tonight, a new trade deal after President Trump meets with China's Xi Jinping.
On the scale of from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would say the meeting was a 12.
What comes next, and will it be enough to end the trade war? Plus, dozens dead, power gone, and entire towns wiped out. The aftermath of Hurricane Melissa and where it's headed next. And government shutdown day 30. Food banks fill up and families struggle to make ends meet.
Am I not going to pay my mortgage? Am I not going to pay my power bill, my gas bill?
For millions of Americans, it's not about politics, but survival. Plus, cyber threats, misinformation, and even violence. Why election security experts are sounding the alarm before voters head to the polls next week. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Nuclear talks and a major trade announcement. Welcome to Faith Nation from Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, President Trump is back in the United States tonight after wrapping up a cross-country tour of Asia. The biggest news coming out of his meeting with President Xi Jinping of China. The U.S. president announcing a new trade deal between the two countries, which consists of China pausing restrictions on exports of rare earth minerals. In exchange, the U.S. will lower tariffs on Chinese fentanyl, reducing the overall tariff rate from 57% to 47%. The president says China will also agree to purchase massive amounts of soybeans and crops from the United States, a major sticking point for American farmers who've been feeling the pinch since Beijing enacted a soybean ban back in May. China was then the largest purchaser of U.S. soybeans. The president giving his impression to reporters aboard Air Force One.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? We have, there was an outstanding group of decisions. I think that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there.
Before his conversation with Xi, the president announced the restart of U.S. nuclear testing, writing on Truce Social, quote, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately," end quote. The United States testing program ended back in 1992 at the end of the Cold War. Well, here to discuss the implications of the president's trip, Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, it's great to have you at Faith Nation again. Let's start with President Xi's and Trump's confirmed their trade framework. It included delaying a ban on some Chinese companies from getting U.S. technology and, of course, on fentanyl. They plan to meet again next year. What do you see as the biggest takeaway?
Greetings. Well, this is, I think, relatively good news in what remains a very difficult economic and strategic relationship. But the good news is that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump want to make sure things don't get too bad, or at least they seem to have achieved that this week. And one can only hope and pray that continues. Obviously, both sides are retaining their leverage over the other, the United States largely with tariffs, but also restrictions on things like advanced semiconductor production machinery, and China with things like rare earth mineral magnets and other commodities and technologies that we depend on them for. And neither side is saying that they're going to stop using these kinds of leverage in the future. As you point out, there's a truce, there's an interim agreement, but at least things haven't fallen completely apart.
So the president also told reporters China's President Xi wants to help end Russia's war with Ukraine. If that's the case, what can China do to show that they're really working towards peace between the two countries?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I have no doubt China would prefer this war to end. I don't think China sees a benefit in the war. But I do think that they are willing to help Vladimir Putin and Russia with their broader economy and even with technology that's relevant to production of military equipment. China has heeded the American request going back to the Biden administration not to send finished weapons to Russia. So they're doing what we asked there. But they're sending machinery that Russia can then put together in factories and build its own weapons. So that's one big area where China could certainly intensify the pressure. And they also could certainly reduce their imports of Russian oil and gas. Those are the two big areas, perhaps. But I don't expect Xi Jinping to do that because he wants to stay friends with Vladimir Putin, and they see some degree of common cause in pushing back against the United States. So I can be hopeful, but I'm not very optimistic.
You know, some consider the president's timing, the announcing of the restart of nuclear testing right before meeting with Xi, as maybe a deterrent. Others worry that China might take this as a green light to spur an arms race. What are your thoughts here?
My thoughts are that President Trump's statement here was a bit confusing and maybe even, if I could say so, partly misinformed, because neither China nor Russia has conducted nuclear tests in the sense that we use that term commonly. In other words, an actual nuclear detonation. Neither one has carried that out. The only country on Earth that has detonated nuclear weapons this century is North Korea. What China is doing is building up its nuclear forces. They're making more weapons, but they're not testing them. Now, that's still reason for concern, of course, but it's not the same thing. And Russia is testing new kinds of delivery vehicles, not the bombs themselves. So again, not a happy development for the United States, but also not necessarily one that should lead to a U.S. nuclear test. So I think the president, he's going to have to reassess just what he means by this proposal.
What do you think he was trying to get at?
I think he might have been misinformed by his advisors. They might have confused. He had a long trip. I was just in Asia this week. I'm younger than the president, and I'm tired. He did a lot of stuff. He did a lot more than I did this week, and he may have simply failed to note the distinction between a new kind of nuclear weapons delivery vehicle and an actual bomb test.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I like the age reference there. Switching gears real quickly to Israel. Wednesday marked the deadliest day since the ceasefire began. And even after the Trump administration had been sending waves of U.S. officials to try to keep that deal intact. Michael, how fragile is this agreement? And can you talk about how other nations may play a part in trying to keep the peace?
Well, it's super fragile, although it's an amazing development. And I give President Trump, about whom I was just a little critical a minute ago, I give him a lot of credit for what he's imposed through his energy and through taking advantage of good new circumstances with the ceasefire. But the idea that it is going to magically turn into an enduring peace is still a long shot. And it's not going to happen magically. It's going to require, as you say, other countries, especially Arab peacekeeping forces and other Muslim majority nation countries like Indonesia, perhaps, to send in forces that are more than just, monitoring ceasefire lines, but are capable of using military force against Hamas if necessary. We're a long ways away from this thing being over. And we also need a vision for a Palestinian state.
Just a few seconds left. Any concerns about Turkey being a part of that peacekeeping force?
I would welcome it. I think Turkey is an American ally. And even though I don't love its leader right now, there's a lot of capability in the Turkish military.
All right, we're going to have to let that be the final word. Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, we always appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you kindly.
Well, commercial flights are landing in Jamaica tonight, bringing the first of critical aid and relief teams just as the Caribbean island nations began digging out after Hurricane Melissa. Officials reporting dozens of deaths from the catastrophic storm that swept across Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. The vast majority of fatalities in Haiti, where massive flooding overtook homes and villages in the coastal south. Meanwhile, rescue and recovery efforts are underway in Jamaica, which is no easy task as roads remain impassable. That includes St. Elizabeth's Parish, one of Jamaica's hardest hit areas. Shelters are also at capacity as residents try to pick up the pieces from the storm's destruction. United Nations Jamaica resident coordinator Dennis Zulu is calling on the international community to help.
Jamaica had been making tremendous progress towards sorting out its economic situation. It was upward looking, sorted out its debt issues. But now with what has happened, it will take a lot of resources to be able to reconstruct and get it back on the upward trajectory.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the United States will provide humanitarian assistance. CBN's Operation Blessing is also preparing to supply food and water to those in need. Hurricane Melissa continues its trek through the Caribbean island of Bermuda this evening. Up next, 30 days and counting. The government shutdown continues, the deepening effect on millions of Americans. That's up next. Welcome back to Faith Nation. The government shutdown lingers with no signs of breaking, even after 30 days of a political impasse. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London joins us now. Michelle, who's been the hardest hit this week?
Well, John, I can tell you that every day the government is closed, different people and different programs are impacted. Starting today, more than 1 million federal workers will go without a paycheck, while more than 1.3 million active duty military members won't get a check tomorrow. Also tomorrow, over on Capitol Hill, House staffers will not be paid while lawmakers continue to get their checks. Let's hear from some federal workers here in D.C. on how they're feeling.
It's starting to get real. You know, we just missed a paycheck, so definitely moving money around, playing money games, and you know, you can't sustain this for much longer. I mean, at some point, you're just going to dry out your savings.
I think D.C. together are pretty much equal in how we feel against this issue. It's just tough that people who are supposed to be supporting us and showing up for us aren't showing up for us.
Yeah, and John, the most people could be impacted by this shutdown this Saturday. That's November 1st. That's when an estimated 42 million Americans will lose SNAP food assistance. And the same day that funding runs dry, open enrollment begins for Affordable Care or Obamacare Act. It could mean higher health insurance payments for at least 24 million Americans. Also on Saturday, Head Start preschool programs around the country could lose funds, affecting at least 65,000 children. John.
Yeah, that soundbite from that man saying things are starting to get real, you can really tell that it's the pressure is growing. London, you recently did a great report with St. Matthew's Cathedral, which is right down the road, to learn what they're doing to help their furloughed parishioners. Can you talk about how other faith leaders are trying to help their flock?
You know, I find it incredible, John, how these churches are standing alongside of these parishioners during times of uncertainty and difficulty. In recent weeks, St. Matthew's has provided for necessities through grocery gift cards and financial assistance, and even started a resume writing workshop this week. Abiding Presence Lutheran Church in Virginia is currently offering a series of free workshops on headshots, resumes, and LinkedIn profiles. Some are giving out loans of up to $500. I also spoke with the D.C. Cluster of Congregations, a nonprofit here in D.C., that tells me they're distributing weekly lists of nearby food banks. Churches are also focused on the spiritual needs of members beyond weekly sermons. They've ramped up online prayer groups in person and listening circles, John.
Just amazing to see them stepping up in this time of need. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance stood in for the late Charlie Kirk last night, fielding tough questions from students at the University of Mississippi, part of a national campus tour hosted by Turning Point USA. The event honored the organization's founder, a conservative activist who was assassinated in September during a college event in Utah. Last night, Vance shared what he considers to be Charlie's best advice for young people.
Charlie wanted you, more than anything, to invest in the things that were worth having, to build a life that was worth building. And that started, the most important advice he ever gave you was fall in love, get married, and start a family. And I can't honor Charlie without repeating that most important advice.
Well, in a nod to Kirk's signature debate style, Vance responded to questions on a range of topics, including immigration policy, religion in public schools, foreign policy, and how to bridge the divide between political parties. He also touched on areas in which he believes Republicans and Democrats can work together, including limiting the power of corporate monopolies. The appearance also marked the first public event on the tour for Erica Kirk, who has taken over Turning Point USA following her husband's death. Coming up, election security on high alert. The warning from experts before voters head to the polls next week. Welcome back. Off-year elections don't normally garner much attention nationally, but this year is just a little bit different. A record number of New Yorkers have already taken to the polls to cast their vote for the city's next mayor. And it's not just the Big Apple. Heated political battles are also playing out nationwide. CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody explains exactly what's at stake.
Until just the last few months, nobody knew much about Zohran Mamdani. By next week, though, he most likely will be New York's next mayor.
The writing's on the wall. Mamdani will secure the victory.
GOP strategist Vanessa Simon understands New York's political terrain. The socialist Mamdani is up against Andrew Cuomo, the state's former governor, who comes with plenty of baggage. Republican Curtis Sliwa has limited support in liberal New York, which leaves Mamdani and his agenda as the one poised to win.
He's shiny, well-spoken, has great social media presence, and he's promising everything, including free, ice cream and lollipops.
Next door in New Jersey, it's a different story for the GOP, as Jack Ciattarelli has a real shot to become New Jersey's first Republican governor since Chris Christie almost a decade ago. It won't be easy, as Democrats significantly outnumber Republicans among registered voters. Still, Democrat Mikey Sherrill hasn't been able to pull away in polls. Further south in Virginia, Democrat Abigail Spanberger has a pretty comfortable lead over Winsome Earl Sears in the race for governor. One of the main strategies for Spanberger's team is to tie Sears to President Trump, thinking that will be the winning ticket. Walter Kurt covers Virginia politics.
They're hyper-focused on telling everybody about Trump. That's all they're talking about. I mean, if you go look at their campaigns, they're not campaigning on Virginia issues. They're campaigning against Trump.
The national media likes to run stories about how Virginia could be a bellwether state for how the nation views Trump and how that may translate into what next year's midterm elections may be like.
I don't think that's true. I think Virginia voters make their own decisions, and I think it's much more localized than that. It's more about what the Virginia voters actually think is going on in their state.
The other state to watch next week is California, where Proposition 50 would essentially allow the blue state's legislature to implement redistricting. If that happens, Democrats would most likely be able to flip 5 congressional seats from red to blue, improving their chances to control the U.S. House next year. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
A lot of races and issues to watch. Well, typically, general and midterm election cycles are a prime target for cyber attacks, misinformation, and even physical violence. This year is shaping up, though, to be an exception with an off-year election. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke shows us why security experts are sounding the alarm.
America's threat environment is now considered to be highly volatile given recent events and divisive political issues. Experts warn these conditions create an opening for bad actors, both foreign and domestic, to undermine Tuesday's elections.
We will likely see online content that's intended to inspire and facilitate violent or destructive activities that would benefit the efforts of these foreign hostile powers to sow discord, undermine confidence in our democratic institutions, and even inspire violent activity.
Homeland Security expert John Cohen with the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, warns states getting national attention are especially at risk.
The playbook used by our adversaries, particularly Russia, China, Iran, foreign terrorist groups, will be to look at those issues that are most divisive, that are causing the most turbulence in American society, and they'll seek to exploit those by creating and pushing out content online that's intended to exacerbate the polarized, divisive nature of our public discourse.
Cyber attacks, now a critical weapon used by our adversaries, according to a recent CIS election threat analysis.
We see government organizations, including election organizations, being targeted for phishing campaigns, where emails that are intended to encourage the recipient to click on a link, which then introduces malware or technical capabilities that will either allow the hacker to access information that they then use in a information campaign to undermine credibility of the election or even impact the operations of those systems.
Cohen points out the highly polarized nature of American society is a major root of the problem.
An increasing number of people in our society believe that violence is an acceptable way to express their ideological or political views or their opposition to the views of others.
Meanwhile, Capitol Hill lawmakers arguing about how to stop this violence, often adding to the dangerous rhetoric.
I'm worried that if we're just going to use the violence that we all abhor to get into an argument about whether it's more left or more right, we kind of lose the point that it's all to be condemned.
We are faced with only two paths. Either we confront this political violence and end it, or it will end us.
Experts urge voters to be skeptical about online reports these next few days and rely instead on trusted, verified sources. Meanwhile, election officials on all levels, along with law enforcement, are advised to evaluate any cyber vulnerabilities and be prepared for potential disruptions both on and offline. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Coming up, a touching reunion between an elderly man and his beloved dog. We explain next on Faith Nation. Well, finally tonight, a heartwarming reunion between a California man and his dog. 93-year-old Norm Feigenbaum and his 7-year-old rescue named Sonny are best friends, as you can see there. So much so that Sonny tried to follow Norm to the grocery store one day, but ended up getting lost. After going missing for nearly 2 weeks, Norm asked for help from a search and rescue who received a tip that Sonny was spotted in a nature preserve. The team set up traps with a trail of Norm's unwashed socks leading to the cage door, which lured Sonny into safety in less than an hour.
Yeah, I'm not going to wash them. I'm going to put them in a frame and hang them on the wall.
The pup is now safe back at home with his best friend, Norm. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow.